this idea of completely customized brackets, customized to the patient, customized bonding surfaces, I think is going to be a lot of fun in the near future.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Orthopreneurs Podcast. Today, I am joined by the most interesting man in the world. He will deny it vociferously, but I want to welcome to the show Colin Corey. Welcome, Colin.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Nice to be here.
Yeah, and I saw you shaking your head and kind of giggling when I introduced you as such, but you didn't see that coming. You didn't know I was going to introduce you that way. But let me give a little background information for people who may not know who you are. He is the guy in the room who should be an orthodontist, but isn't. If you meet him at a party or you meet him at a meeting, you'd swear he was an orthodontist because he really feels that way. But I first met Colin what was your role? Were you chief engineer?
Yeah, I was a senior engineer at that time.
He was a senior engineer at Henry Schein Ortho at the time. There's no harm in saying the name because, that's his history.
Absolutely.
But I remember him taking the time to really answer a million of my questions when it came to the design, particularly of the porcelain or the clear bracket that they were making and all the really cool tech that went into it. And the more I started speaking to him about engineering, two things became apparent. One, he really is a gifted engineer and understands things remarkably well and has a way of explaining it to you in a way that'll make sense. But if you start talking to him about things like martial arts or taking a motorcycle tour or doing all these sorts of things, as evidenced by those who are watching and not just listening, seeing the games, the hall of games behind him, this is a guy who was born in the wrong era because he should be on horseback riding across the country, with a broadsword in hand. And so he's just a really well-rounded, amazing individual. And hopefully as we move through this process of interview today, you'll get to see that as well. And so real quickly, Colin, just because I brought it up, do you still practice martial arts?
Yep, my wife and I both do. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're a white belt, right?
Something like that. So yeah, we're black belts in Kempo Karate, and we are second degree brown belts in Choi Foot Kung Fu. So
there you go. So that's just a small little taste of who he is. And of course, I think I remember going to one of the meetings and you had just come across some long drive, you and Luis Carrier, right?
Yes, that's right. We did a motorcycle tour out in Arizona that time. And I ride motorcycles, and I live in Southern California. So it's a perfect place to ride bikes and have a lot of fun in the sunshine.
Yeah. And so as you get to know Colin a little bit, you realize one of the things that draws me to him as a friend is more than just an engineer, right? A lot of engineers at parties, you'll sit there. And the funny thing about all engineers, and it cracks me up, is every engineer thinks that every other engineer is a hack. That's and it's so true. And the best part is every engineer believes that the other aspects of engineering, aside from the engineering they do, is idiot engineers. So
there you go.
Tell me I'm wrong. Just
No. I mean, some people think that.
Yeah. So he really has a great way of explaining things. And so your current role is you're co-founder and CEO of Braces on Demand, right?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
So let's start here. Before we jump into Braces on Demand and what that's all about and let people know a little bit more about that, give everybody just a little bit of a quick background about how you got to where you are today. Like, how did you end up here, educationally, life-wise? What brought you to this moment?
Sure. So, grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and my family owns and operates a series of screw machine shops. And so,
of what kind of shops?
Screw machine shops. So,
screw machines.
Yeah, the turning operations for basically Silicon Valley and their medical device industry. So I think the largest, we're the longest supplier of Hewlett Packard. Back when Hewlett and Packard were out of their garage, was my great-grandfather making parts for them. So I grew up doing that. I grew up making all kinds of parts. It's incredibly fun, but my grandparents wanted to teach me the value of a dollar. And so I worked every summer since I was, 5 years old. And basically learned how to make things, learned that I loved making them and I loved designing them even more. So I got to go to school to be a mechanical engineer, undergrad biomedical engineer for my grad work, and then worked in Silicon Valley for a number of years. Moved down to San Diego because my wife wanted to get her PhD. And so followed her down here, started with Ortho Organizers at the time, which turned into Henry Schein Orthodontics, and stayed there for about 8 years. And then started up Braces on Demand just a couple of years ago.
Right on. What drew you to the ortho world? I mean, a guy with your pedigree, you were a mechanical engineer before you went to school, right? You were sort of looking at grandma and grandpa stuff and understanding how things worked. But you said Silicon Valley and what have you. How did you end up in orthodontics?
So originally, a lot of my focus was in orthopedics. And I was working with orthopedic surgeons and doing a lot of stuff with, prosthetics and doing other stuff in that kind of sector. And orthodontics, it was a very similar kind of industry in some ways. I mean, you're talking about some of the same kind of skeletal mechanics. I mean, different things, obviously, but I thought it was a group of doctors that I could really work with. And that was one of the things that really drew me to it. Was I worked with cardiovascular surgeons, and I've worked with, orthopedists, and I've worked with orthodontists. And orthodontists have this way of visualizing how teeth are going to move that is so cool from an engineering perspective. You see in 3 dimensions how these teeth are going to go from where they're at now to where you want them to be. That kind of thinking directly translates into how you talk and how you view the world. And it makes it really easy to work with orthodontists, and found out that I loved it.
Cool. Yeah, and that drew me to orthodontics as well. I always tell patients, when I have a kid who invariably says, "Hey, how do I become an orthodontist?" I say to them, "Can you play chess? Like, you understand the rules of chess and how, you have to sort of play out 5, 6, 7, 8 moves in advance." And then as orthodontists, at least the most successful ones I know, they're always sort of the Stephen Coveyism of beginning with the end in mind. They're always playing out the entire game from A to Z before they've ever sat down at the board. And to me, that was really, really a compelling thing to consider before I went into ortho. So I totally get where you're coming from. So let's talk a little bit about Braces on Demand, BOD, as it's affectionately known by its TLA. But let's start with an overview of what is Braces on Demand in a broad sense.
In a broad sense, Braces on Demand is a software company. It's a technology company that empowers orthodontists to 3D print all kinds of appliances right in their own office. If you want to print out some buttons or some braces or some molar tubes or some hooks, whatever it is, we have the software that lets you do that yourself. Very
cool. And so we're not talking about things like RPEs currently, right? We're not talking about lab appliances. We're talking
not lab appliances. So basically the backstory here. So Dr. Shannon, who's the other of my co-founders, Dr. Tom Shannon, he had this idea when we first started out, and he was very frustrated. So he had been 3D printing in his practice for quite some time, and all he was doing was printing models for aligners and retainers. And he posed the question to me, why can't I do more? Why can't I print out more than just models for aligners and retainers? Why can't I print braces? Why can't I print all these other things? And that was the kind of inflection point that got us started to say, why not? Let's prove that you can do that. And it became, if you can bond it to a tooth, we want to have it in our library so that you can print it.
Right on. Yeah, that's a pretty broad statement right there. If you can, if you can attach it to a tooth, I want it in my library.
That's what we want. Yeah.
Very cool. And so let's discuss 3D printing a little bit, because a lot of us, myself, I've got a printer. I've had one for probably about 4 or 5 years now. I remember the days, probably no less than 3 years ago, give or take, where, if you ask people, do you print? The overwhelming majority of orthodontists, I would still say don't print in their offices. But even back then, few were doing it. Let's talk a little bit about 3D printing and anything related to what we need to know as background information to understand how this works.
Sure. So 3D printing in orthodontics it's a great industry to have 3D printing as a manufacturing technology, because you can create things that are incredibly custom to patients, or you can create things that are generic for patients, and you can do it in a very quick time frame. We're not talking about making, big airfoils and big parts on a 3D printer. We're talking about really tiny stuff. So relatively fast print times and printer technology, it's a really cool type of technology because it's improved so much just in the last few years.
Oh, yeah.
And we're talking about 10 years ago, 3D printers were light years behind where we're at today. And 10 years from now, we're going to be doing things that we can't even imagine today. Yeah. And so it's a really cool technology. Materials are constantly improving. They're getting faster, more accurate, and they're getting to be pretty easy to use. They weren't always easy to use, and now they're so easy to plug into a practice and get 3 little machines and print it, wash it, cure it, and away you go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't mention earlier, and I should have, I do have a financial interest in Braces on Demand. And part of it is because I saw this company making what they're making and said, we all see companies we want to be a part of. And I just happened to be in the right place at the right time and was able to sort of get involved in an early stage with it. I'm not a founder, as you know. You and Tom Shannon are the 2 founders, but I'm lucky enough to be on this journey with you because it's been a great educational experience for me. Now, in talking about resolution, right, the smallest amount we can print, do 3D printers have the ability right now, without spending 3 years to print something, can we get down to the resolution necessary to have the tolerances we need for brackets?
Absolutely, 100%. And when you're talking about resolution and 3D printers, there's a few things that are huge benefits that 3D printers allow you to do, and there's some things that are, kind of drawbacks. You have to figure out how to support your bracket to get those idealized tolerances. You have to figure out how your features are going to be in such a way that you can produce the tightest tolerances possible. But those are all design challenges that are inherent to whatever you're making. There's huge benefits when it comes to 3D printing because you can print geometries that you would never be able to injection mold, which is really cool, especially when we're talking about things that are on that micro scale like braces.
Very cool. And so, the first question I asked myself when I learned about Braces on Demand was, well, I use resin every single day. It seems brittle, right? I think in our practice right now, we have 8 or 9 printers. And, when we print something, it cracks, it breaks, it wears, it's plastic, it doesn't last that well. Yep. But what you're printing from or what you're so again, just to be clear, there's the design of the product, right? It might be a bracket or some other appliance. And then there's the implementation of the printing of it, which occurred backstage, so to speak, where you guys created the files, and the other happens in the office. Can you explain that a little bit? And then we'll jump into the idea of what material you're using.
Basically, if you're using Braces on Demand, you go onto the Braces on Demand website, you select whatever it is that you want to be printing, you customize it however you want to. And then when you say yes, those files get packaged up and sent directly to your printer. So there's no handling of files, no orienting of files. We do all of that for you. There's no creating of supports. We do all of that for you. Once the files show up at your printer, it's a pretty simple process to print it, wash it, and cure it. So printing it is right around 2 hours with the current printers that we're using with Formlabs, and that's to print right around 100 brackets. And it's 2 hours to print, 10 minutes to wash, 30 minutes to cure. And what we're talking about in terms of material is pretty different than a lot of the materials that you're probably used to using, because you're using your printers right now for making models for aligners and retainers, correct?
Correct.
So that's a draft resin or something similar that's designed to go really fast to make these relatively big models. And what we've done is change a lot of that we're making some really small models, and it's a particular material that we started with for dentures, same material that you make for digital dentures. And it's a great material because it's super stain resistant. It's able to be matched in terms of tooth tone. And it's a really robust material. It's not quite as hard as ceramic, but it's pretty darn hard. And so we're able to design a lot of things similar to how you design ceramics.
Right on. Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool because my partner Doug Shaw recently had his first case that he bonded. And it's really weird to see like tooth shade brackets that actually match the tooth almost perfectly. You sort of look at it and go, why do I have to have these O-ties on here? It like ruins everything. But when you say any color resin, you really can almost go any color resin, which is kind of cool to be able to pick a shade that actually matches. And I think at the end of the day, as a patient, I'd want to have what matches my teeth the best it can, right? And you said it doesn't stain?
No, so it's incredibly stain resistant. I mean, everything will stain depending on the right staining agent, but
Right.
for modern staining, yeah, that's pretty stain resistant.
And realistically, having made my share of dentures, they will stain over time, but we're not keeping these in people's mouths for 4, 5, 6 years, hopefully.
Exactly.
Hopefully they're out of their mouth in 18, 24 months, maybe a little bit longer. And again, it's remarkable. Does the slot distort at all? Does it wear at all?
So I mean, you're going to get some, normal wear and tear in a bracket, but what we found is that the slots are pretty resilient. And when things are debonded, the slots are actually in the same shape that when they started, which is exactly what we want.
Cool. And so a doctor said, technically, and I'm just sort of thinking this out a little bit. So a doctor has a new patient start, they put a down payment on their whatever bracket they use in the practice. I'm not going to mention names, but whatever bracket it is, let's call it an 022 with, say, an MBT sort of prescription in it, or a Roth prescription. The doctor or the TC can simply tell one of the assistants, hey, this is a case that's going to get started, and they can actually go online onto the interface and go order the brackets they need, right? It can be standard brackets. And I'm going to get into customization in just a minute, so I don't want to jump in there yet. But it can just be almost any style of bracket I'm looking for with any prescription. I can print that out, correct?
Absolutely correct.
So I can have a twin. I can have a self-ligating, a passive self-ligating bracket, correct?
Yes. So right now you can have twin brackets, single wing brackets, no wing brackets. You can do them as tubes, as passive self-ligation, as standard conventional, open slots. You do all kinds of stuff. It's really at your fingertips to customize however much you want.
So whatever I want, I get. And if I say, hey, I'm a brand new practice, I want to run lean and mean, I don't want to buy 300 sets of brackets, I'm going to print 2 days before every new patient. So a patient comes in, they're going to get started on Thursday, Tuesday night I can print it, Wednesday morning come in my office, wash, cure, done, ready to go.
That's a huge thing that we've found a lot of doctors are really excited about, because coming from the more traditional orthodontic manufacturing, it's hard to keep every SKU in stock, and things going on back order really disrupts the practice. So the fact that you're relying on yourself now, you're no more than a couple hours away from having any bracket of any flavor of any prescription is a really cool thing.
And that's currently, correct? Like that's right now, at this moment, irrespective of whose brackets I use right now, I can find something very similar to it in terms of the library and print it out, and away I go.
Absolutely.
It's remarkable to me that you can do that. What about other appliances? What about things? What other kind of appliances? And again, to the people out there who think I'm being coy when I ask these questions, realistically speaking, I haven't asked a lot of these questions to Colin. And so I'm getting this for me as well. Aside from brackets, what are some of the other sort of appliances that you see people printing out currently?
So a lot of people are printing their buttons, hooks, other widgets like that. Some people print out attachments and then bond them up and use them. They scan with the attachments already in place. A lot of people are printing their
So just backing up for a second,
sure.
That sounds to me like it would work really well for an in-house aligner sort of situation, where specific teeth are going to need specific attachments. So you print out the attachments, glue them on, right, and then scan that, and now you've got yourself
rather than using a transfer tray. So that's one area where we see people doing it. So we have a whole category of different widgets. And it's so fun because we're constantly adding to it. We're constantly getting new ideas of things that doctors want that they haven't been able to get from the big manufacturers. So one of the kind of innovations in there was doctors were looking at our attachments that they were printing out, and they wanted a more hybrid attachment. So take an attachment, run an arch wire slot through it. Let me thread that wire through, and then I can run a wire for a little while, pull the wire out, and I have my attachments already in place. Those kind of things that are really kind of fun to make and bring to the market.
I remember seeing that in one of the, I don't remember where I saw it in the company stuff, but essentially you made an attachment that you could use to sort of straight align teeth really quickly, right? So you could run a simple like 014 wire through attachments that were put on a number of teeth. So they're smaller than brackets, but had little holes through them, like tubes, anterior tubes.
Micro tubes.
Right.
Right. So you were able to, it was one of those things that doctor had an idea and we were able to design it and test it with them. And bring it to market pretty fast. And it solves this problem that they were having where they didn't want to pay for a full set of braces, but they were able to get what we call pivots, bond them up, run a wire, make it very inexpensive. They're able to do some limited treatment and then unravel that case, go into aligners, make that hybrid case much better.
You know, Doug Shaw would be very proud of me if I said, when you say the word pivot, all I can think of is Ross from Friends, right? But again, for me personally, one of the biggest challenges I face in aligner therapy is that really rotated, second bicuspid or first bicuspid. That just, you got to think of outside the box ways of aligning it. And it sounds to me like this could be a really great way of saying, hey, I'm going to put 3, 4, 5 attachments on, thread an arch wire into it for 2, 3 months, get that tooth rotated, pull out the arch wire, and suddenly, boom, I can scan it and put an aligner on it.
That we're seeing a lot more of. And then we're seeing people take that even a step further. And because they're printing the product themselves, they're actually saving quite a bit of money doing so. And so I'm seeing a lot of doctors that are actually bonding up cases that they would have treated with aligners and a full set of brackets, running a wire for 3, 4, 5 months, pulling that out and making it a really easy aligner case, especially on those complicated ones that would have taken a lot longer. And if you're shaving stages off with your aligners, then essentially you're saving chair time and predictability of that case outcome.
Very cool. And so you got twins, you got without wings, with wings. It sounds like a veritable smorgasbord. But I couldn't understand how you were going to do passive self-ligating until I saw the passive self-ligating. Do you want to explain to people out there how you were able to do passive self-ligating? And the follow-up question is, what would you tell anybody out there who is a devotee to a specific brand of bracket? I use passive self-ligating by X because they are a specific company that understands my needs. What would you tell those people? So again, how did you do it, and what would you tell those folks?
So we have 2 types of passive self-ligation, one of which is released, the other one that we're working on and to be released soon. So the first one is a single piece passive self-ligation. And it came about because doctors were using pivots and they were tired of threading their wires through. And so they wanted to be able to come in from the facial surface. And so we created a type of passive self-ligating bracket that, as an orthodontist, it's going to look funny when you bond it, because when you're so used to looking down an arch wire slot and having it be, perpendicular to the world. And this one, the slot is actually angled a little bit, so you can twist the wire and it snaps in place. You have 2 little wings that overhook the wire, make it into a 1-piece passive self-ligating bracket. So started as a 1-piece passive self-ligating pivot, turned into a full lineup of brackets.
And there's another bracket out there on the market that sort of, I told you before we started, I'm not mentioning names of any companies other than Henry Schein when I said I met you. But there, if I'm not mistaken, there is a company that already has that for about 10 years now has been doing brackets that way, right?
Yep. So there's a few companies that have something similar. This one's a little different in a number of ways, but gets to do a lot of what you're expecting out of a passive self-ligating bracket, but it does it in that 1-piece format.
Cool. And you said there was something you were working on? So
the 2-piece passive self-ligating bracket, which is essentially a door and a bracket, very similar to what you're used to using. Most of the other manufacturers do it that way. And so figuring out how to print those 2 components and get them to actuate correctly and function as intended has been a really fun design challenge, but it's turned out to be really great, and gonna look forward to sharing that with you in the near future.
I think I saw a prototype of that, did I not?
Yeah. Yes, you did.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool how that snaps together. And I think people's heads are going to explode when they see it, because it's pretty flippin' amazing how you make that door open and close.
The coolest thing about it is that, like you said, I'm so used to using bracket X because it fulfills these needs that I have.
Right.
You can have this bracket do whatever you need it to. Like, it can be any prescription that you want. It can do what you want it to do because it's fully customizable. So we did something kind of cool with Braces on Demand where we utilized something called parametric modeling, which it's super nerdy of me, but I'm a huge nerd, so that's okay. But basically, you get a set number of variables that come in and you output your final model. And so we can have most any tip, torque, offset. You can have all different slot sizes. You can do all these things that those keys weren't always in the orthodontist's hand, because the traditional way to make things was to make a bunch of molds for it. Once that mold's made, it's set in stone. So now that's kind of unlocked for you. You can start really playing around. And wouldn't it be nice to be able to have a passive self-ligating bracket that you could customize per patient? Like that's the goal of where we want to go. So.
And that's why I started working with, in my practice, an 0217593 slot. I find it's really, it works really well. But again, I think what you just said can easily be swept under the rug and forgotten about, but I want to say it again. You just said that basically any bracket that you could imagine is yours for the taking, hopefully, eventually. So yep. How does that translate into customized appliances for patients? Meaning, patient comes in, I want to use a straight wire with no bends in it whatsoever. I want it to be the color of the teeth, right? I want it to be self-ligating, let's just say, and I want to be able to just have it built. Are you able to do that now, or is it something that hopefully down the road you'll be able to do?
You are not able to do that now. Absolutely, that's something that down the road you're going to be able to do.
So let's just model this out a little bit. You know,
sure.
We both talked about how we love ortho because of that ability to look out forward. So let's model this out. You've come up with a way of making it so that I can just bond brackets on teeth, put a straight wire in there and have them straighten out and have them be the I guess technically it no longer matters the prescription, because you're going to develop that yourself. For each and every bracket will have its own prescription, right? Because it's going to be designed with the end outcome in mind, correct?
Yep, everything's designed off that final. So your final smile design, that final arch form that you want, everything's backward calculated from that.
Right. And so I assume then the ability to have an indirect bonding tray will happen as well.
Yep, that is absolutely part of that system. Doesn't work without the indirect bonding tray.
So I would ask, because I think I have to ask this question, there are certain companies out there, again, remaining nameless, who are currently in that space. Mm-hmm. I understand the value of wanting to be able to print something out from my own office. I get that. I understand the value of having whatever color one wants. Why would somebody who is sitting at home ever want to consider this versus, say, going to one of the companies that currently has that? Is it a price issue? Is it just a convenience issue?
A couple of big things that are different. So it's definitely, there's a big price difference between what people are doing today and what they can do with braces on demand. One of the things that we really strive to do was, because the doctor is printing it themselves, you're able to have huge cost savings associated with that. And that's something that is a big driver for a lot of doctors. The other thing in there that I think is really a big differentiator is that you're not going to wait, 3, 4, 5 weeks to get this. You're able to do it right then, on demand, whenever you want it. So that same day start kind of workflow can actually happen, especially as printers get faster and faster. You're able to do a lot of that. And the last thing that I've been finding as I talk to more and more doctors about this that really is impactful is a lot of people are very conscious of their carbon footprint. They want to reduce it. And it's interesting because so many of the bigger manufacturers in orthodontic products, it's a relatively high carbon footprint to make braces, to do that, to all the packaging that goes into it, all the machines, the machine time and sintering furnaces, polishing, everything that goes into that. And then it's the packaging and the shipping on top of it make it have a relatively high carbon footprint per bracket. If you're printing it yourself, you have one shipment for 1 liter of resin that makes 2,500 brackets. I mean, it's a huge difference in terms of that carbon footprint. There's very little waste. It's a really cool thing. So some of the more eco-conscious among us, that's been another driver for it as well.
Very cool. And so will I be able to do this from any printer? Or are there specific printers, and in the future is the goal to add more?
Yes, there are specific printers in the future. The goal in the future is absolutely to add more. But right now it's compatible with the Formlabs Form 3B printers. That's where we started when the project started a couple of years ago. And printers have only gotten better since then, but absolutely we're expanding the stable of printers that you're able to do this on.
Got it. And so have there been any cases, I guess my question is, how far along are the first cases that were ever printed and done? How far, I guess if I was out there listening to this conversation, I'd be asking, how do I know it's going to last? How do I know it's not going to debond? How do I know it's not going to break?
Yep, totally.
How long have these things been watched for?
Boy, 2 years now.
Okay.
So they've been in the mouth almost 2 years. And yeah, I think we're at almost 2,000 patients that have been bonded. So wow. We have a decent amount of data. Dr. Shannon is prolific. And so we've got a lot to start with. And actually it's a great thing we started with this. So we had a 3D printer, and he was just so brutal on the design of the brackets at the time. I had to prove that we could do this with twin brackets. And so every week I'd send a print to him. He'd print it out. He'd give me all this feedback. And then on that Wednesday, he'd get a second print. And then on that Friday, he'd get a third print. And so we were able to have multiple design iterations within the week. And he has a pretty demanding staff, and all this great feedback turned into all the ways not to make an orthodontic bracket, and the one way to really make it seamless, make it easy. So.
Very cool. Very cool. So any other projects down the road on the horizon, anything you want to share other than the stuff we've talked about?
I mean, the passive self-ligating bracket, there's a lot of really cool stuff around that. And then this idea of completely customized brackets, customized to the patient, customized bonding surfaces, I think is going to be a lot of fun in the near future.
And that'll be passive self-ligating and regular twins
and single wings. And I mean, it's whatever you want it to be.
Single wing. Wow. Going back to Moody Alexander, right? Going to the Alexander bracket, which I've worked with. Very cool. Anything else you wanted to add to the conversation, Colin, that maybe I might have forgotten or I just don't know about?
No, I mean, the big thing here is really this idea that we're trying to give doctors another tool in their toolbox. And being able to print it yourself is a big part of that. Never going on back order again is a great benefit for an office. But on even a step beyond that is this ability to hybridize in a way that you can't do currently. So many times I would go into an office and they would be making this decision point of either aligners or braces. It was an either or. And the products were priced such that you couldn't do both. It was too expensive to bond up a full case of brackets and then partway through treatment, debond them and go into a full set of aligners. That was just not a winning combination. Right. But there are certain things that brackets do really well, certain things that aligners do really well. And if those two tools were at your fingertips where you could print them both yourself, all of a sudden you can do things that you weren't necessarily doing before. And that has been some of the most fun for me of doctors that are doing these hybrid treatments that are incredibly fast and effective and super cool. And that's why I started doing this. I love designing things. I love working with doctors where they have these great ideas and making these cool things that end up making people smile.
Very cool. The one thing you did touch upon there, which makes me question, is how are they to debond? You talked about debonding.
Yeah.
How hard are these to get off?
So much better than debonding ceramic brackets can be a real pain and kind of cringy, so these, because they're a resin base, it's much more friendly. So yeah, much friendlier to debond, much more like what you're used to with metal brackets. Not quite the same peel that you get on a foil mesh pad, but not a snapping off the tooth either.
Yeah, I gotta say, anybody listening here who's ever done clear knows when that thing shatters into 50 pieces and the patient jumps because they hear the sound.
Yep.
If I could avoid that the rest of my life, I'll be happy.
Absolutely.
But no, I really appreciate you, Colin. I know we've had some good times, when we get together, and I've had a chance to talk to you about engineering stuff and learning more from you. And I'm just excited that we get to be a part of this together. Cool. Because what I've seen so far, and again, in full transparency for people listening, I've seen very little compared to what's out there for braces on demand. But what I have seen has really blown me away. And I think the ability for every orthodontist to be able to print the prescription, the style of bracket they want, that's going to last, be able to debond relatively easily, be the right color, or whether it be a button, an attachment, a tube, whatever it may be. It almost sounds too good to be true. And as my partner Doug Shaw would attest, he's already bonded it. It's not too good to be true. It actually works, clear as you say it. So can't wait to see you at Orthopreneur Summit. Should be fun for anybody who's coming to be able to see that and handle it and understand it and chat with you about it. And I just want to say thank you so much for being a part of this today.
Thank you very much for having me, and looking forward to seeing you in Austin.
Yes, sir. I can't wait to see the developments you have.